The American food system runs on rules, USDA stamps, safety standards, and humane requirements that consumers trust with every meal. But behind those labels, some of the country's largest food companies still rely on practices that are technically illegal, repeatedly documented, and rarely punished. Some violations will shock you. Others have been reported to regulators for years without result. The reasons why might change how you trust American food forever. Number 25. Pesticide residue violations. Fresh produce looks safe, but USDA testing repeatedly catches residues above legal EPA limits, especially on strawberries, spinach, and peppers. Tolerance thresholds were set before chronic low-dose exposure risks were fully understood. The USDA Pesticide Data Program flagged over 500 above-limit samples in 2022, and split enforcement between the EPA and FDA means product often sells before action is taken. A legal limit only protects you when someone actually enforces it. Number 24. Child labor in agriculture. Federal law prohibits minors in hazardous work, but agriculture holds an explicit exemption allowing children as young as 12 to work in fields under rules weaker than almost any other industry. Some companies go further, deploying underage workers in conditions that violate even those loosened standards. A 2023 New York Times investigation found minors in food processing plants tied to major American brands. That exemption was written by farm lobbies in the 1930s and has never been closed. Number 23. Clean Water Act discharge violations. Large hog and poultry operations are legally required to contain animal waste, but EPA enforcement records consistently document illegal discharges into rivers and streams across Iowa, North Carolina, and Missouri. The EPA's 2023 data showed hundreds of CAFOs operating with expired or absent permits. Fines, when they come, are typically smaller than the cost of compliance infrastructure. When violation is cheaper than compliance, violation becomes standard practice. Number 22. False organic certification. Organic labels carry a meaningful promise, but federal investigations have exposed large-scale fraud in the supply chain. A 2017 Washington Post investigation found 36 million pounds of soybeans and corn worth roughly $30 million imported with fraudulent organic certifications from Ukraine and Turkey. The USDA program relies on third-party certifiers, creating gaps wide enough to move industrial-scale fraud. An organic label is a promise. Some suppliers are deliberately breaking it. Number 21. Illegal antibiotic use in livestock. FDA regulations restrict medically important antibiotics in livestock to curb resistance, but inspection records show repeated violations at hog and poultry operations using antibiotics without veterinary authorization or beyond approved limits. The CDC estimates antibiotic-resistant infections kill approximately 35,000 Americans annually, with agricultural overuse as a contributing driver. Enforcement remains inconsistent and penalties routinely too small to change behavior. The bacteria keep evolving, the fines stay small. Number 20. Falsified USDA inspection records. Federal inspectors are the last barrier between the processing floor and your plate, but USDA whistleblower reports describe facilities where contamination logs are filled in advance and failures documented as resolved before they are addressed. In 2019, inspectors testified that 175 birds per minute poultry line speeds made meaningful contamination checks physically impossible. Falsifying federal inspection records is a criminal offense. Prosecution of corporate actors remains rare. The integrity of the inspection depends on the honesty of the inspected. Number 19. Undocumented worker exploitation. Federal law prohibits employing undocumented workers, but agriculture and meatpacking have long relied on immigrant labor that strict enforcement would collapse. ICE audits of food processing plants between 2018 and 2020 found widespread violations at facilities supplying national grocery chains. Undocumented workers are routinely underpaid, denied workers' compensation, and unable to report violations without risking deportation. A food system that benefits from invisible workers is built to keep them invisible. Number 18. Animal cruelty violations. The Humane Methods of Slaughter Act requires animals be rendered insensible before slaughter, but USDA records document over 15,000 humane handling violations at federally inspected facilities between 2015 and 2020. Undercover footage from hog and poultry operations has repeatedly caught conditions violating both federal and state cruelty statutes. Several states responded not by prosecuting violators, but by passing ag-gag laws criminalizing the filming itself. When the law protects the practice instead of the animal, something has gone badly wrong. Number 17. Country of origin mislabeling. Origin labeling laws require beef, pork, and seafood to carry accurate sourcing, but investigations have documented foreign-raised cattle processed minimally in the U.S. to claim an American label. In 2015, Congress repealed mandatory COOL requirements for beef and pork under WTO pressure, eliminating consumer protection through legislative convenience. A 2019 Oceana study found 21% of seafood samples tested nationwide were mislabeled. The product on your plate may not come from where the label suggests. Number 16. Illegal groundwater depletion. The Ogallala Aquifer underpins roughly $35 billion in annual agricultural output across 8 states. But state water records document withdrawals exceeding legal permit allocations in Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas. Enforcement against large operations is inconsistent, and penalties rarely match the scale of violation. NASA's GRACE satellite program has documented ongoing depletion that ground-level enforcement has failed to slow. A country that runs out of water cannot feed itself, and some farms are spending that water illegally right now. Number 15. Manure lagoon overflow. CAFOs store billions of gallons of animal waste under federally mandated containment rules. But overflow events, sometimes weather-driven, sometimes deliberate, regularly discharge untreated waste into rivers across the Midwest and Southeast. A 2020 Environment America report found the top 20 U.S. meat companies generated more nitrogen and phosphorus pollution than the entire oil and gas sector in several key metrics. EPA fines for lagoon violations typically fall far short of the cost of compliant infrastructure. When the fine is cheaper than the fix, the math is simple. Number 14. Illegal pesticide application. FIFRA requires restricted-use pesticides be applied only by certified, licensed operators. But California's Department of Pesticide Regulation and EPA records consistently document farm workers applying acutely hazardous chemicals without certification, training, or protective equipment. Chlorpyrifos, restricted from food use by the EPA in 2021, continued appearing in illegal applications at some operations after the restriction took effect. Undocumented farm workers have virtually no legal avenue to refuse or report. The most dangerous chemical on the farm is sometimes applied by the person least protected by the law. Number 13. Cold chain temperature violations. FDA regulations under the Food Safety Modernization Act require strict temperature controls from processing through delivery. A 2021 USDA audit found temperature violations at 18% of sampled cold storage locations. Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli outbreaks linked to cold chain failures cause an estimated 3,000 deaths and 128,000 hospitalizations in the U.S. annually. The difference between a legal temperature and an illegal one is often just a few degrees. The difference in human cost can be catastrophic. Number 12. Illegal wetland destruction. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act prohibits filling wetlands without a Corps of Engineers permit, but agricultural expansion has repeatedly destroyed wetland acreage illegally to create cropland, with EPA and Army Corps enforcement documenting violations covering hundreds of acres per case in Iowa, Mississippi, and Florida. Wetlands filter runoff, recharge aquifers, and reduce flooding. Their destruction causes harm far beyond the farm boundary. The Supreme Court's 2023 Sackett ruling further narrowed federal protections, making already difficult prosecutions harder. Number 11. Unapproved feed additives. FDA rules specify exactly which substances can legally enter animal feed. But agricultural inspection records document the use of illegal growth-promoting compounds and industrial byproducts at feedlot operations across multiple states. In 2012, the FDA found illegal use of Carbadox, an antimicrobial never approved for swine, at hog operations in several states. The FDA's feed testing program covers a small fraction of total national feed volume, meaning most violations are never detected. What enters the feed enters the food. Not all of it is permitted.
Number 10. HACCP plan falsification. Every federally inspected meat facility must faithfully implement a hazard analysis critical control points plan. But USDA whistleblower reports describe facilities where safety logs are pre-filled, failures go unrecorded, and corrective actions documented as complete before they occurred. The 2008 Westland Hallmark recall, 143 million pounds of beef from a plant supplying school lunches, followed discovery of systematic HACCP violations invisible to routine inspection. Falsifying federal food safety records is a federal crime. It is also a competitive advantage for facilities willing to commit it. Number 9. Air quality violations at feedlots. Large CAFOs emit hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and particulate matter at concentrations violating Clean Air Act standards, but agriculture secured a near-total air quality reporting exemption that held from 2008 until a federal court struck it down in 2017. Enforcement since has remained limited. Johns Hopkins researchers found communities within 2 miles of large hog operations suffer elevated rates of respiratory illness, hypertension, and infant mortality. Operators have fought air quality monitoring through lobbying and litigation for decades. The pollution reaches neighbors, the accountability does not. Number 8. Illegal price coordination. Federal antitrust law prohibits competitors from coordinating on pricing, but the meatpacking sector has faced repeated documented accusations of exactly that. Pilgrim's Pride pled guilty to broiler chicken price-fixing conspiracy in 2021 and paid a $107 million criminal fine. A separate class action against JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef alleged coordinated price suppression against cattle ranchers. When 4 companies control roughly 80% of U.S. beef processing, the line between market power and illegal coordination becomes very thin. Number 7. Dairy label fraud. Federal law prohibits antibiotic residues in milk, but the FDA's bulk tank testing system catches only a fraction of violations. The USDA's 2021 National Milk Drug Residue Database documented violations across states. Separately, dairies marketing milk as RBGH-free when it isn't constitute label fraud documented in FDA complaint files, a practice commanding fraudulent price premiums in a market where consumers are explicitly paying to avoid the hormone. A glass of milk carries more chemistry than most labels acknowledge. Number 6. Illegal slaughter of downer cattle. Federal law prohibits non-ambulatory cattle from entering the human food supply. Animals too sick to stand cannot legally be slaughtered for food. But the 2008 Westland Hallmark investigation, triggered by undercover Humane Society footage, documented workers using forklifts and electric prods to force downed cattle into the slaughter line at a plant supplying the National School Lunch Program. The recall that followed, 143 million pounds, remains the largest beef recall in American history. The plant had passed regular USDA inspections throughout. A law is only as strong as the inspection behind it. Number 5. Farm subsidy fraud. Federal farm subsidy programs distribute approximately $20 billion annually based on farmer-reported acreage, yields, and losses, data the USDA often cannot independently verify. GAO audits have documented systematic over-reporting of crop losses and fraudulent disaster declarations routing payments to ineligible recipients. A 2020 USDA Inspector General report identified $6.6 million in improper payments within a single specialty crop program alone. Independent auditors have repeatedly described the fraud detection infrastructure as inadequate to the program's scale. Federal money flows out efficiently. Accountability flows back slowly. Number 4. OSHA agricultural worker violations. Agricultural workers suffer some of the highest injury rates of any American workforce, but federal OSHA jurisdiction over farms with fewer than 11 employees is nearly non-existent, an exemption Congress has renewed every year since 1976. For larger operations, citations document repeated violations of heat safety, pesticide handling, and machinery guarding requirements. The heat death of a California farm worker in 2021 prompted emergency state rulemaking because federal protections were insufficient. The people who grow American food have fewer workplace safety rights than people who build or sell almost anything else. Number 3. Conservation easement violations. Farmers receiving USDA conservation payments sign legal agreements not to farm or develop enrolled land, but USDA Inspector General reports document cases where enrolled acreage was illegally tilled, grazed, or converted while producers continued collecting federal payments. A 2019 OIG audit found the Natural Resources Conservation Service lacked adequate monitoring to detect violations across millions of enrolled acres. The Conservation Reserve Program alone distributes approximately $1.8 billion annually. Federal conservation dollars funding illegal farming is not a theory, it is an audited, documented finding. Number 2. Seafood species fraud. Federal law requires seafood to accurately identify the species being sold, but repeated DNA testing by Oceana has exposed widespread mislabeling across the American seafood supply, with cheaper fish sold as premium species and farmed product labeled as wild-caught. A 2019 Oceana study found 21% of U.S. seafood samples were mislabeled, with rates reaching 43% in some New York City categories. The FDA inspects less than 1% of imported seafood by volume. The fish on your plate may have never seen the ocean described on its label. Number 1. Systemic slaughter line speed violations. The most pervasive illegal practice in American food production is built into the system itself. Federal regulations cap slaughter line speeds to protect food safety and worker safety, but the USDA's own Inspector General found in 2013 that the agency was approving speeds exceeding regulatory limits at poultry facilities, while simultaneously pushing to raise those limits further. Federal inspectors testified that 175 birds per minute made meaningful contamination checks physically impossible. Meatpacking workers suffer injury rates 3 times the national manufacturing average. In 2020, plants ordered open under the Defense Production Act became COVID-19 outbreak sites. The line ran faster than the law allowed. Workers absorbed the consequences. Companies absorbed the profit. History delivers the same lesson through different industries. When the penalty is smaller than the profit, the violation becomes policy. The rules exist because something went terribly wrong without them, and violations continue because enforcement rarely matches the scale of the industry it is supposed to govern. Hit that subscribe button to discover more buried truths about the systems shaping what you eat every day.